All right, hot mic. We're jumping back in. Take number 2, episode 2 of the Wisconsin BHA Hike to Hunt podcast. I am joined. I'm Bill Koepke. Get the re-intro out of the way. Strength and conditioning coach, certified athletic trainer, Stevens Point, Wisconsin. All things fitness, outdoors, rambling podcast. I love it all. Big fan of BHA. I'm joined by my co-hosts, Ryan, Emily, and Kelly. We are diving into week 2 of Hike to Hunt and the topic of R3 this week. So, challenges this week. First, it's the first weekend. This is episode 2. We're gonna have two episodes this week. If it's at any point is confusing the timeline, it's because we recorded this before episode 1. We've got 2 challenges this week. Most miles hiked wins us a $300, right, Ryan? $300 gift card from
That's
Danner.
what it says on the website. Danner Boots gift certificate. Yep.
Perfect. Then we've got a $200 value or Ridge Reaper jacket from Under Armour for most artistic route. Great prizes. I love it. We're throwing in a Wisconsin challenge that doesn't get you any prize other than to be highlighted on Wisconsin BHA social media. And that is to post a story for recruitment. Your idea, your why for recruitment in the R3 movement. If you're not sure what recruitment is, we'll be diving into that today with Emily. So super excited for that. Little fitness spiel about Hike to Hunt and R3, where I see it fitting in. Hike to Hunt through Backcountry Hunters and Anglers is all about getting outdoors, being active, your reason why for fitness and physical capacity going into hunting season. So for recruitment, I see that as getting a new person outdoors that normally wouldn't have access to it. For retention, someone like Ryan, he's training for elk season. There's a lot of miles there. He's got to carry a heavy pack. He's got to hike in. And then for reactivation, I host a archery hunting fitness class here in Stevens Point. And it's for people that are getting older, people like my dad who have to stay on year round to stay active and fit. So come bow season, we're not limited by physical capacity that we could have been keeping going all year at a high level or a much higher level than if you sit on your butt all summer. So that was the quick and dirty. Take number 2. With that, Emily, take it away. R3, what it is, where it's from, why it's important.
For sure. So like Bill was just saying, R3 stands for recruitment, retention, and reactivation. And it's all about hunters and also anglers and trappers and kind of these traditional participants in the outdoors. And it also includes shooting sports enthusiasts. And there's a kind of a reason for that we can chat about in a minute here. But so the number of these people participating in hunting and fishing especially has been declining since the 1980s. And in the 1990s, a rural sociologist at UW-Madison just happened to observe these trends as he was conducting his research. So that was Tom Heberlein. And he published an article about it in 1996, just noting it in the journal. I think it was the Journal of Wildlife Ecology. It might have been a slightly different one, but he just pointed it out and talked a lot about the implications of what that meant. And so it really has big implications for state fish and wildlife agencies like Wisconsin's Department of Natural Resources. And the reason is because through the Pittman-Robertson Act, especially, the number of guns and ammunition sold through and this is where I always wonder about how much detail to go in. So if you guys need to stop me and kind of simplify it a little bit. But basically, I mean, there's a tax on firearms and ammunition that goes to a big pot in the National Treasury, and that money is all earmarked for the conservation of wildlife and administrating state fish and wildlife programs. So every year, all that money is reallocated to all 50 states, kind of depending on how big the state is and how many licensed hunters they have. And that's a huge chunk of the money that these agencies work off of from year to year. And not to mention that in Wisconsin, especially, hunting is just a huge part of our history and tradition. And we're really well known for being a destination state for deer hunting. We've got amazing deer here. And so kind of losing that is losing a little bit of our culture and identity, maybe it almost feels like. And so that's kind of R3 in a nutshell. And so I got hired just a few years ago, and the R3 team at Wisconsin DNR is brand new. We're one of the very first teams in the country dedicated just to R3 issues. But it's really growing as a topic in the field of wildlife management. So it's very cool.
I love it. Ryan, does that answer the question before the podcast on what's R3? Or do you want her to dive in more? How deep do you want to go in the rabbit hole?
I don't know, how much time do we have to fill? No, that covers it. And like I said, I had a pretty general understanding of it. The only question I have is just based on that last comment. Now, are there other state wildlife agencies that are starting to get on board with kind of dedicating a team to the R3?
Yeah, so I'm on Midwest. It's basically, so there's the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, which is made up of leadership from all the different agencies in the country. And so there's a Midwest section or region. And so in that region, there's an R3 committee. So Iowa, Minnesota, Illinois, all the states in the Midwest are involved in that. And we've got a pretty good showing here. And I think that Wisconsin has been a leader in R3 for a really long time, but definitely other states, especially around us, are involved. And it's great to be able to meet with those people to just move ideas forward. And I think, I can't stress enough, but it's a very new topic. And so I think having it been identified in Wisconsin speaks a lot to the strength of it in the Midwest, but it's definitely an issue for all 50 states and even the territories. So as people see that, I think they're starting to figure out kind of what works and what doesn't work, and just kind of taking a look at their license numbers from year to year. So it's definitely growing.
Bam.
The federal agencies too have started to do some more R3 type activities, Fish and Wildlife Service being one of them. Having in each region now, they sort of have their own R3 initiatives. And I think it's fair to say too, Emily, that even in the short time that R3 has been a focus in Wisconsin DNR, that it's already evolved in terms of, maybe groups that they want to engage or approaches to engagement. So it's quickly evolving in order to reach the most people and be the most relevant, even in the short amount of time that we've had an R3 focus.
Yeah, I think, that's a super good point, because R3 hasn't always been called R3 for sure. And you've been involved in a lot of the different programs like Conservation Leaders for Tomorrow that, that came about early on. And so they were starting to address that, but it hadn't really become a cohesive identified effort yet. So how long have you been involved in Conservation Leaders for Tomorrow?
Not terribly long. I recently got invited to be an instructor within the past couple of years. And then that first class that we just had at UW-Madison this past winter before the pandemic was the first time that I instructed. So not very long, but at the instructor class that we had, there was a ton of discussion about just how delivering a program like that needs to evolve, what else we can be doing, how it has already evolved since Scott Craven and others instituted it. So just trying to keep on top of what it means to be relevant when you deliver programs like that.
Nice. For some reason, I thought you were involved in it for a lot longer, but I think it's because you're a natural fit for it. But yeah, Conservation Leaders for Tomorrow is a program that takes place in universities, and correct me if I'm wrong, Kelly, but I think it started when a lot of professors and academic staff started just recognizing that the demographics in the wildlife departments were changing. And so, I mean, historically, the students who came in to study wildlife ecology, like almost certainly were hunters for
Showed
sure.
up to class in camo and face paint.
Yeah, totally. And then
Yeah.
after a while, they just started seeing changes. Like people were coming in to study wildlife ecology, didn't grow up in that. And I think a lot of it has to do with like just like broader level changes, like urbanization and stuff like that, and thinking about just, you know, when University of Wisconsin was founded as a land grant university, I think a lot of the state was more rural than it is now.
Yeah, for sure. CLFT also does quite an extensive number of classes for resource professionals. So people like myself and Emily who work for a conservation agency who maybe didn't have a traditional wildlife ecology undergraduate curriculum, and they are not very familiar with the North American model or how hunting fits into the conservation picture. And so employers like the Fish and Wildlife Service pay to send a variety of their employees every year to this program to familiarize them with the North American model, and hunting, an actual hunt is an aspect of the program as well, and hunter safety is an aspect of the program. So but founded here in Wisconsin, and has been, I mean, I can't say how long it's been around for, but doing the class here with the students on campus was super enlightening, I think, to everybody, because it just gives a really fresh perspective on what it means to be a new hunter in the 21st century. Most of these people have very little exposure to hunting, come from literally all over the world. And what it means to be a hunter in the United States right now is just really interesting conversations to have with people who are in a university setting, generally are students at different stages in their life as a student. But yeah, it was fun.
Bam.
So they run that program up in Stevens Point, right?
I have never heard of it, but I've just taken a ton of notes. So
okay,
we're gonna dive into that. No, I as soon as you said
I
it
don't
happens,
think they do.
Yeah, as soon as you said it happens
Really?
at a university, I'm like,
Oh,
I don't
wow.
know if that happens at Point. Yeah, so this is awesome though, kind of like the leadership model, and looking at, you were both talking about the broadening scope of conservation. It's not just about wildlife ecology for game species, but it's a much broader look at how we're viewing it, and that's kind of what we all have. We've got a list of these themes and these ideas. For me, R3 became more of an idea. AJ DeRosa from Project Upland and Northwoods Collective, he came to UWSP last year, the year before, and he was speaking about R3. His whole presentation was about R3. The conservation professor had him in, and he kind of talked about it, where it's been, what it's done, and how we need to make it more inclusive, more attractive for all of these different micro communities. And our notes today are about the traditional hunting experience, traditional hunting families, kind of the privilege and the tradition that's brought up there. Here in Stevens Point, we have the local food movement through Farm Shed, which is a local entity that I've been working with to kind of integrate more wild game into that conversation of local food. So we're bringing the local food community, and we have great organizations like Becoming an Outdoorswoman. My friend Trevor, for his senior project for being a dietitian. Sorry if I murder this, Trevor. Don't kill me. He did a workshop on venison meal prep. So venison butchering, venison meals, how to do more than just snack sticks and steaks. So we did bone marrow for salads. There was a stew. There was... Trevor, I apologize. It was a great meal. I loved every moment of it. What else do we have? Steaks, bone marrow, stews. Anyways, it was a great meal. Everyone should look into it. So great programs like that we've got going on. The conservation leaders for tomorrow, you know, looking at an academic approach. So I'm guessing it's definitely more systems based. Got all of these things going on. So how do we bring them together? And something, Emily, I know you were talking about when we were all messaging back and forth is, where does BHA fit in? That's why we're here, right? Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, Wisconsin chapter. We've got to hike to hunt. We're staying active. We're getting out and moving. It's a younger demographic. I want to say the average age is somewhere in the early 30s compared to most conservation organizations are quite older for average age typically. Emily, where do you see BHA or the idea of micro communities fitting into the future of R3?
It's an interesting question. I'd love to get your guys' take on it as very involved members of BHA. But yeah, I think the things that you mentioned are just really interesting and unique in and of themselves. And Backcountry Hunters and Anglers I think it's like the fastest growing hunting organization, and it's made up of young people, which is amazing. And I don't know, how did you guys learn about BHA? Because I feel like it's definitely an organization that I've identified with, maybe more so than some of those traditional organizations like Pheasants Forever and the Turkey Federation and QDMA and things like that. And so I think that obviously, I mean, this is a group of hunters that's going to be carrying the tradition forward. And so it's really important to be reaching out to this group and learning what's drawing them in and what kind of messages are they going to be taking to future generations. So yeah, I'd love to get yours and Ryan's takes on how you heard about BHA and why you joined.
Ryan, dive in. Let's go. Ryan,
so Bill asked me the same thing when we first started talking about this. So it's sort of fresh in my memory. But yeah, so really I started doing some research to go on an elk hunt out in Colorado. I did this last year. The research started probably a year and a half, 2 years prior to that. Stumbled across BHA, didn't really think a whole lot of it, just through all the podcasts and stuff that I was listening to, just to gain some knowledge on what the heck I was going to be getting myself into out in Colorado. And then at that point, I took a 4-day fishing trip up to the Boundary Waters. I had never been up there. I've spent a lot of time up in northern Minnesota, but not specifically the Boundary Waters. And we got in there, and it was early October, and we ended up being rained on, snowed on, wet, cold for 4 days on an island in the middle of a lake. And I had an absolute blast and basically said, well, there's not a whole lot of places like this available. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, I think any one of us could probably go out and take a short drive and probably get lost in the woods somewhere and have a great time. But it was a little bit more than that. Saw my first moose in the wild, which was awesome. Barely caught any fish, and I had an absolute blast. Coming back from that, I kind of looked more into BHA as well. I mean, as well as the other conservation organizations like Rocky Mountain Elk and stuff like that. And I never really thought to, one, volunteer my time. That was really nothing that had crossed my mind in the past. 2, donate money. Other than getting a cool sticker, I didn't really think much more than that. So coming back from that trip and just being in what I want my kids to have someday. And my son's getting older now. He's going to be 8, and he's bugging me to go up to the Boundary Waters. So I'm hoping that I can give him that experience a little sooner than I got it at, 31 or however old I was. So I don't know if that answered any questions, but.
Yeah, definitely. So it sounded like you kind of came into it through an interest in hunting and that you just got to experience backcountry in a way that you hadn't before. So that's awesome. Were you always a hunter, or did you learn to do that later in life?
No, so I mean, I remember when I was a kid going up to the Nicolet National Forest and grouse hunting with my dad while he was looking for deer stands. So I mean, it's been there my whole life to a certain degree. But I mean, once I got to probably 15, 16, I kind of put everything on the back burner. I played collegiate sports. So I played football through college, and I just did not really have the time. And I guess at that point, I didn't really have a whole lot of interest in it. Not that I didn't enjoy it. It just, there was other more important things. And I just couldn't put the time in that's necessary to go out and at least put yourself in a position to be successful. So I didn't really pick hunting back up until probably 23. So I took a good 7-year break, and then got back into it, and just more and more as time permits. And now it seems like it's less and less as time permits with having little kids and stuff like that. But they're getting to that age where they can come out with me, which I'm looking forward to.
That's awesome. Kelly, what brought you into backcountry hunters and anglers? Because you grew up with hunting, and how did you find out about it?
I suspect my introduction to BHA is similar to a variety of other people's. I got dragged to a pint night here in the Madison area a couple of years ago, and was just interested because I have this passion for public lands. I mean, my friends are like, here's this cool organization. We love drinking beer. Let's, we can go talk about public lands and drink beer. And so that was sort of my gateway into it, and I went to a couple of pint nights, and I was still like, I don't know, I'm pretty selective with my time, I guess, that I give to organizations. And I went to the pint night where Land was here and at the Thirsty Goat, and ended up chatting with him later in the evening and had some and said, Land, I think you have a gender issue at this pint night. And he's here and I don't know why. And he challenged me to lean in and help figure out how do we get more gender equity in BHA. And so that's sort of how I got really interested in the group. And that's what led to, Liz Baker and Julie Whitholm and Emily and I talking about how do we get women out on public lands. And I think related to your comment, Emily, about how BHA fits in with R3, I was really interested in BHA because of its broad mission and its appreciation for public lands in this broad sphere, not just for hunting and angling, but people recreating on public lands. And so that's why I think it's so primed to be a part of R3, and that in addition to having an interest in hunting and angling and other traditional recreational opportunities, it has this really broad interest in public lands. And so that can invite a whole another crowd of people in that we haven't been doing a great job of reaching in our traditional R3 methods. And that's, I guess, what's kept me hanging around and continuing to be interested, is that for me, it's always been a lot more about more than hunting and how do we get more hunters. It's about how do we get people to appreciate and support public lands, the management of them, and the increased amount of them, especially in a state like Wisconsin, where we have a lot of public lands, but it's pretty fragmented, and we're talking about small pieces, and we've got a lot of demand for it. And so how do we fill that demand with all of these different types of recreation that people want to do? And I just think of all of the conservation organizations, BHA is totally primed to fit that niche.
I love that perspective, because you're right. It's called Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. And I guess when I think about it, I always focus in on the hunting and angling part, but at the core, almost a bigger mission is the public lands part. And I think that's super important, especially as more people are, one of the foundational characteristics of the United States is that, our resources, and especially wildlife and fish and lands to a big extent, need to be accessible to everybody, and have some sense of equity. And so, yeah, I think as people become more and more concentrated in towns and cities and suburbs, that becomes a huge issue. So I really like that. Bill, how did you become a member of BHA?
I'm lost in thought with the two of you. And all
I know. I feel like I need to stew on Kelly's comments.
I know.
Now. Stuff. There's stuff there.
All right. When this pandemic is over, Kelly, Thirsty Goat, beer's on me. We're diving in.
Yep.
I can't wait. I'll keep it short because we've still got our intro podcast coming up. it had been a long hiatus from hunting for various reasons. I'll dive into the deer camp reasons because TJ wants us to talk about deer camp on the podcast. So that's my transition there. TJ, deer camp, we'll talk about it. My deer camp experience was super negative. There was a lot of parts of it I did not enjoy growing up, and that pushed me away from hunting. And then similar to Ryan, but I am not at all athletic. Don't let me fool you. I work in that space, but I am not a field athlete by any means. So didn't take up hunting for a very long time. And then in college, a client of mine who I was helping train for an out west hunt, and this is kind of where the hike to hunt fitness for hunting really in R3 really plays a part for me. He had fallen out of hunting. He's a big time hunter, Dean Elby. I'll make sure to, I've got his story on my podcast. I'll share it in the notes, but he got me back into hunting through archery, through training, getting him fit and ready, healthy to do this Western hunt, sit in his tree stand. As we all know, it takes a certain level of flexibility to sit in a tree stand for extended periods of time without your body starting to shut down on you and inflict weird spasms and pain on you if you're not prepared for it. So he got me back into hunting. He introduced me to Stephen Ranella, Meat Eater book, which I absolutely loved. It's very similar to my upbringing. And in class, down a deep rabbit hole, not paying attention, I'd heard BHA in a podcast, so I'm looking it up, researching it. And this was probably 6 years ago. I want to say 2014. Found BHA. Super excited about it. Love the mission. Love the idea. Been a member ever since. And in the last couple of years, been trying to become more involved in the process, like understanding the why behind our board members. Like, hey, what gets you in? Why are you involved? Where can I step in as a constituent, a citizen? Who should I be reaching out to as a representative, as a senator? Who should I be writing to? Who like all of that kind of stuff because of what I'm interested in. I grew up hunting public land on the Ice Age Trail, and the paper mill that owned the land, when they closed up, all of the land was sold to private landowners, which is a super bummer. Like that whole area, I can't step foot on. I have to stay on the trail if I go through there. So that idea of public land just being taken from you, I grew up taking that for granted with that idea, like, oh, this is always going to be here. This is rad. This is a permanent park. And then boom, gone. Like very quickly. So BHA it resonated with me. I love that it's younger. I love beer. I love pint nights. I met TJ at a pint night. Loved it. Just the idea of it, the energy. Bryce, Liz is amazing. I love talking to her. And hearing their perspectives and where I can weigh in as someone who otherwise would be just off in the weeds, taking everything for granted and not putting in my due diligence and taking my responsibility as a steward, like taking that mantle on. So that's how I got into BHA. That's why I'm sticking around. And then hike to hunt. I've had a blast the last couple times we've done it. And I told TJ, if we can't have pint nights, I'm going to bring the pint nights to my house and we're going to do a podcast about it. And we're going to talk with super cool people and let's make it happen. So here we are.
Just an interesting thought. It's cool that BHA is a private organization who backs public lands. Like, are there other organizations? I'm trying to think off the top of my head, and obviously the state and the federal government, they're the stewards of those lands and they're ultimately responsible. But it's very cool to have, somebody else come in and say that how important these are. And so I don't know, maybe that's where BHA is really unique too. But there's lots of good organizations out there. And I think they all have kind of different missions. And obviously, like Pheasants Forever is really involved in private land conservation. And so the majority of lands in Wisconsin are privately owned. So obvious that we need to have some efforts there. But I'll probably think of one after this, but I don't know if I can think of one that's really championed the public lands up till now.
Exactly. And like Kelly, there's a lot of organizations, and I've become super selective. It's not just enough to send them a check for however much. I do love all the stickers though. Like Ryan, love me some conservation stickers. My
You should see my car.
right? My hunting trunk is conservation stickers, but a friend of mine, Ted, he having some conversations challenged me to kind of like, well, do more than that, be more than that, be involved and understand the systems more, because kind of like the public land I grew up hunting on, very quickly it can be taken away from you. So yeah. With that, Emily, do you have a direction you want to dive into this next? What do you want to dive into Kelly's questions? Do you want to dive into a particular micro community? Where do you think we should head to next?
Well, one of the questions I kind of had coming out of this conversation is the BHA, fastest growing hunting related organization. I was just kind of wondering, like, do you guys feel like you have good relationships with, like, I guess when I think about BHA, I think about a certain kind of person. I'm thinking about Ryan with his big beard and his hat, and I'm thinking about Bill, who runs the Team Early Cast, and like tattoos, and you guys are in your 30s probably. And so I'm wondering, like, I mean, is there much diversity within BHA itself? Or is it, obviously Kelly was saying, I mean, it's definitely still very male oriented. And so, but I'm also wondering, like, age wise, is there, and this is me being my population dynamics education, but is there like good age structure in this population at BHA? But so yeah, and just kind of like, I was wondering about your thoughts on why that might be, and if you talk often with hunters who maybe don't look like my typical BHA member picture at all.
Ryan, you want to jump on that spear point before
I mean, I can speak to it a little bit just based on the BHA members that I guess I've spent time with, and that's so Noah Wishaw, who is on the board in the state. I know his parents are both members, and they've been at just about everything that I've been at. So that's kind of and Noah's, I think he's a couple years older than me. But yeah, once again, kind of falls into the mid-30s guy who's hunted. And I guess looking, maybe I am the stereotype. I don't know. But this is not a flat bill. This does have a curve. So
I was going to ask if it said Filson on it, but I don't think it does.
No, it doesn't. No. But yeah, I mean, I think that that's a major point is to, I mean, I don't know if people kind of, I don't know, the more you do in life, and I guess the more you save up, I mean, does that kind of turn you into somebody who, I don't want to say anti-public land, but myself, I would love to own a piece of property to hunt on at some point. That's not dismissing any of the public lands that we have, but do people kind of go through the phase of, well, I'm in my mid-20s to 40 years old, all I can do is afford to hunt public land. So I'm going to get behind an organization that is going to fight for the stuff that I have, versus somebody who's 45 to 60 and they have a nice little 40-acre plot that they can hunt on and they don't have to think about it as much. And I think that's more so, and I don't want to say an issue here, but I think you look at states like Wisconsin and Iowa, Illinois, where people tend to have, I mean, the state's chopped up. There's little chunks everywhere that people can buy up. And I don't know, I'd like to know what the demographics are for BHA, like out west, like where there is a ton of public land. And it seems like, I don't know, just from social media posts that I stumble across, it seems like there's an older population of BHA members out west. And I don't know if that has any correlation to with what we have here in the state, but that's, I guess, just an observation on my end.
For sure. I think that could make a lot of sense, especially out west. That'd be interesting to take a look at. But yeah, the only reason I asked is because, I mean, like, I hate to bring up a I hate to bring up divides or, put people into their little boxes, but I definitely, like in my work, I start to see these lines in the sand about, older, maybe traditional hunters who grew up, maybe with land in Wisconsin or with farms in Wisconsin or something like that. And then, they look at BHA and say, well, those are just a bunch of bearded, tattooed millennials. And I hate to bring up the millennial discussion, I really do, but it's just something practical in my work that I think I see once in a while. And it was good to get your thoughts on it, because I agree. I think I am super lucky, and my parents just bought 50 acres right here in town, and so I'm just like, oh my god. But and yeah, I think there is a big question about public lands and what you end up doing on them, and especially from people who are lucky enough to have their own property to use and care for. But and I think that it probably does speak to a lot of generational differences for sure. And I mean, basically, we're the kids of the baby boomer generation, probably Generation X, who grew up in a very different place and setting, and the state looked a lot different back then when they were growing up too. And so I think it's important just to keep that in mind as I talk to people, especially too, that it's always good to reach out across those little lines in the sand and try to understand where the other side's coming from. But yeah, I feel super lucky too to have had kind of been forced to use public lands and have such a good experience on them, and that's really turned into something that I'm going to hold with me for the rest of my life, is caring for these places that are open to everybody. So yeah, I was just interested in, I know there's kind of a push for diversifying gender wise, and then I mean race wise as well, but the age thing I think is huge in hunting especially. So just wanted to get your thoughts on that. So maybe reaching out to a hunter outside of BHA, or who maybe doesn't look like you in some capacity, could be a good practice for everybody to think about.
I love that. Kelly, so if I want to throw this hot potato at you now. So you've got Ryan, Bryce, TJ, all in a leadership role for Wisconsin BHA. They all have beards. Bryce is tatted up. They're all the bearded white guy like Emily's talking about. Land throws it at you. Hey, lean in, help us make this. How do we bring in female leadership into these roles, or female membership? That's a lot. How do you work with that? Are you throwing out those?
All of these things that Emily bringing up, related, they're relevant to both things we're trying to accomplish in BHA and in R3. We're trying to reach all of these audiences, and in some ways struggling to do that because your membership or the people who are instructing at R3 maybe don't look like the people who are interested in coming to the events. And this is one of the things that I talked to Land and Liz about a lot was, part of the problem that we need to overcome somehow to get people interested in BHA is, it is intimidating for a woman to show up at a pint night when maybe there'll be one of 5 women there and there'll be 30 guys. And, I as a wildlife biologist, I've spent my career in scenarios like that. So it doesn't necessarily bother me, but if we're trying to recruit completely new people into this circle, they might be very uncomfortable with that. And so how do we build that bridge? And I think, again, I just think BHA is a really good organization to do that. And thus why Liz, Julie, Emily, and I were thinking, okay, how do we start at the basic level of how do we get women who like to be outside to understand access to public lands? How how we get public lands in the state and what they are allowed to do recreational wise there. Maybe they don't, maybe they just want to hike with their kids, and thus, this organization BHA thus means something to those people. It gets them on these areas for free, essentially for free, to do an outdoor activity that they maybe wouldn't otherwise do. And we've talked a lot about how women in particular need some level of community, I think, to sort of break the ice when they want to be involved in organizations like this. It just seems to be something that women tend to gravitate towards, is having a little bit more sense of community than I guess some of our male family members or friends have. Where I've known a lot of the guys that show up at the BHA Pine Ice don't know anybody, and it just seems like they feel really comfortable doing that because they know they're going to see somebody else there that looks like them for the most part. And again, that's still sort of, it's still shedding some light on maybe one of the issues at hand of how do we recruit this broad audience, because we're recruiting a lot of the same people that look like us and act like us. And so how do we, make the tent bigger and start getting people comfortable to not only show up at the events, but then, move into officer positions or move into leadership roles or move into planning events for BHA, all those kinds of things. And so it struck me when Lan was like, well, it starts with you, you got to do it. And I was like, yeah, that's right. I mean, there has to be a couple of us that are brave enough to step in, and hopefully there will be others then that follow suit. It's the only way we're going to be able, I think it's the only way we're going to get, and I'm speaking from this place of, again, being really interested in getting women involved in BHA and outdoor rec. To me, it's a fundamental way that we get women involved. And it's for whatever reason where it's really a community-based type thing. And we feel comfortable participating in these smaller groups. And that hopefully then builds this level of curiosity and courage to keep coming and to keep trying new things. I think it's especially important for women to be able to talk to other women about experiences like hunting, experiences like what gear works for them. I mean, we've talked about a lot of these things in the past year. Liz, Emily, Julie, and I have all of these these seemingly small barriers, but that can maybe add up to a big thing to get other people involved. And how do we start to break some of those down? So I hope that gets a little bit at your question, Bill. I think it's persistence. I mean, it's persistently having people who want to lean in to help the others be comfortable and participating in the activities that we're all trying to get people to do, and appreciate the things that we're ultimately trying to get them to appreciate, which is public land access. For whatever and wherever, meeting them wherever they're at and in their experience of appreciation for public lands, whether that's hiking, whether that's bird watching, whether that's hunting. I think about all the people during this pandemic that have been utilizing public lands as predominantly not hunters, and at least in the southern part of the state. To me, BHA is still an organization for them. It's totally an organization for them. If they want to be able to utilize public land spaces and support them in some way, I think BHA is a great organization for them. So how do we reach those people? How do we get them to our Pine Nights? Those are all questions I keep asking myself. And again, that's why I continue to be involved, because I feel like I can somehow build that bridge just by being present.
I totally agree with that. I think 80% of the battle is persistence, just because I don't know, my introduction to hunting was basically, I was interested in it for sure. And I always wanted to be competent in the outdoors, but it was effing hard. Like, it was hard to learn those skills, and it was hard to, feel comfortable in that community. But I feel like I was stubborn enough to just stick it out, and now I feel comfortable here. But and I think people appreciate that. But it's been an interesting journey for sure, that just like thinking back when I first started learning about hunting, not even about joining organizations or anything like that, that I don't know, I was just really uncomfortable talking about it, and feeling like a novice, or I didn't know what I was doing. And that's always hard. Like, if you want to take up some hobby later in life, or you want to join in with some group later in life, it's just like, you got to suck it up and be the new guy for a while, or suck it up and suck at stuff for a while. And that is very difficult. And so, yeah, to me, obviously it was super worth it. And I think once you invest that amount of time and effort, it becomes something you hold very closely to your heart. So stick with it. I'm sticking with you, Kelly. And I hope other people have the guts to kind of come in and be uncomfortable for a little while too.
Riding it out. So I'm a big and Emily, you got to get rolling at 4:15, right?
Yes.
Okay, so we've got less than 10 minutes. I'm a big call to action person. I love having call to actions on my podcast, my posts. Ryan, I feel like they're talking to us as like, if you look at any BHA or most outdoor pictures, it's going to be like a white dude with a beard. That's, the Filson hat, blah, 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 blah. How can we reach across the sand? They're challenging us. I feel it. I'm going to step up. I'm going to be uncomfortable. How do we reach across the sand to someone that doesn't look like us, and invite them out into this this hike to hunt 2020?
I appreciate you putting me on the spot like that. So I guess that's something that I had not looked at. So my wife doesn't hunt. She's into fishing, and she loves going out hiking with me. But other than that, like, I don't have, I mean, just thinking about it, like, I count on one hand the number of females that I know that hunt. And they're by no means people that I'm close to in any way. It's just acquaintances throughout the year, people I went to high school with. So that's a tough one. And it sounds like there's a lot more to it than just saying, hey, why don't you come out and go to a pint night or whatever it may be. And it's just something I've never really thought about. So maybe that's my call to action, is just to kind of, I guess, dive down that rabbit hole a little bit and see what could possibly be done. Maybe I drag my wife along to a pint night and just kind of get her perspective on it and see if she can offer anything to say, like, oh, it would be easier if they did this, and this. It's probably not as simple as that, but being the simple person that I am, I'm just gonna say I have to do some research. But no, that's an interesting point that I'd never thought about.
I totally think you're just speaking to the masses here, because it's hard, especially like you can count on one hand the number of women who hunt, and you don't know them, and that's just like, it's very difficult to be in that situation. And I can definitely I don't know, I know when I've come to like shooting ranges, or if I go to some new group, I always appreciate it when people come up to me and say, hey, like, where are you from? Like, what's your interest? And that I'm like welcome in the group, and that you like to see that I'm there. So that's definitely one thing that I don't know, I appreciate. I'm sure Kelly does too, is sort of reaching out and making those connections. But you can't do that unless they're not there. So that's a tough question. And I do think that that Kelly's right, that it's important for people to come and be there and set the example. So that was kind of my thoughts on that. But I just wanted to tell you that it's a difficult ask, and I think your answer was perfect.
Wow, I've never gotten that before, but no, I'll be straight up honest. It's something I've never thought about, and until right now, I guess I didn't know that I had to think about it. But it seems like because I have 2 daughters as well, which I would, as of right now, probably not going to go on any unicorn hunts because that's a big popular animal in my house. But yeah, I mean, I would obviously encourage them to come along and just be a part of the outdoors, whether it's just hiking or fishing. I mean, all my kids are into fishing. Well, my 1-year-old isn't, but either way, I mean, it's something I would like to expose my daughters to, if they're interested in it. And I think it goes beyond me just saying, hey, come fishing with me or whatever it may be, because there's still going to be all those other hurdles, unless my kids are just don't get, and they'll do whatever they want to do, which I hope that's how they are. That's just my opinion. But
And a lot of us, Ryan, I think a lot of the women that are hunters and anglers have been, introduced by the men in our lives. I mean, Emily, your husband helped introduce you. And so my dad introduced me. And what's interesting too about the pint nights is that a lot of the ladies that you do see there are the spouses. And that's great. I mean, I love that. I think what I'm also trying to think about is if there's a person out there who doesn't have any other connection to this organization because their male spouse or their male significant other isn't going, how do we get them comfortable enough to come? Or how do we get them comfortable to do outdoor rec on public lands? How do we get them comfortable to show up at the shooting range, without knowing anybody? Those kinds of things when they don't have some other means to get there. And a lot of times, I think for women, it means they want to be able to participate with another woman. That just adds another level of comfort and empathy for how they're experiencing this outdoor recreational opportunity that keeps them coming back. And the more men that we have that can recognize that and are inclusive, when, like Emily said, by just being welcoming, is a huge deal. It's a huge deal. I mean, it's just sort of like, again, if you think about if you showed up someplace and you didn't know anybody, what would it take for you to keep going to those events over and over again? Probably somebody needs to talk to you when you're there. You need to make some sort of level of personal connection with somebody. You need to find some way that your lives intersect. And so how do we cultivate those connections at these events is super important to think about. And again, as a woman who would show up without knowing anybody, if I hadn't had these friends that went, I probably would never have gone, because at least I could talk to them. And so I think bringing any of your friends to who are not familiar with the organization is super important. That's the way that we get people in the door. And then the next part is how do you maintain their level of interest as well?
Bam. I think they crushed it. What do you think, Emily? Ryan, Kelly, that was a amazing ending to this episode. So, Emily, do you agree? Do we?
Yes.
Okay.
Totally agree. Yeah, I think that community is key, whether you're thinking about your immediate family or reaching out to somebody new or kind of taking the plunge and entering a community that you don't know yet, but that you want to be a part of. And so, yeah, that was a great ending.
I love it.
Perfect.
And cycle back to our challenge, social media posts on the why for recruitment. There's the Mr. Rogers, quote, look for the helpers. Well, I think everyone here, we're all challenging you to be the helpers. Be welcoming is what I heard. I've got my notes. Be welcoming, ask questions, understand their why. Find that common connection for outdoor rec, public lands, why you're here, and from there you can invite this person into this world, and we can grow BHA, we can grow public lands, we can grow Pittman Robertson, and we can safeguard public lands going into the future. So Yeah, awesome. Great episode 2. Everyone watching or listening, thanks for joining us. Reminder, check out BHA HQ's Podcast and Blast every other Tuesday. And with that, we will see you all next week. Later.